Good evening, and welcome to Chai FM. I'm Mashi Lipsker, and it's a pleasure to be with you this evening, particularly as this week, since before the festival of Shavuot, it is a week of unity, increased unity, because it's the catch-up week. Till now, from Shavuot, we had a different Torah reading to that which they read in the land of Israel. And finally, by having two portions read together this Shabbos, we've increased our unity in that this week, our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land and we in the diaspora all read the same Torah portion. Of course, that means that we need to read two to catch up. But let's talk about our real unity. Our real unity is to recognize our united or common mission, and then to join together to fulfill it. And every week when we read the Torah portion or Torah portions, there are wonderful things that speak directly to us, to tell us, to inspire us, to help us to fulfill our joint mission and our personal mission in this world. So welcome to Chai FM, and we're about to look at something very, very special that's highlighted in the first of the two portions this week. The Jews wandered in the desert, we're told, for 40 years. But it is important to know that many of those years were not spent wandering. Many of those years were spent in one place. Last week, we studied about the rebellion of Korach. Korach, a Levite who was vying for the position of high priest. When that fiasco was over, the Jews actually spent the next 19 years on the border of the land of Israel. For the next 19 years, they stayed in one place. But following that, there were 19 years of wandering. We don't have details about those 19 years, but the Torah now goes on into the last year, the 40th year. And in this portion, as we did several weeks ago, we hear again about a very special woman. Well, we hear about the passing of Miriam. Let's explore who was Miriam and what can we gain by studying about her and the way she lived her life. Because Miriam was born at the most bitter time of the Egyptian exile. The last 86 years of the Egyptian exile were the most difficult. And when Miriam was 86 years old, that's when the redemption took place. The Jews were living a bitter life, an oppressive life. But these, we are told, were the birth pangs that would precede the redemption. These were the darkest moments before dawn. But Hashem did not leave the people just to suffer and to struggle. He provided them with a redeemer. And our sages tell us the redeemer was Miriam. Yes, Goyel zu Miriam. The name, Miriam, the name which her parents gave her when she was born in that year where the bitterness intensified. The name indicates bitterness, Mar, because she was born actually to sweeten the bitterness, to turn the bitterness into sweetness. Because those last years in Egypt were a tremendous, tremendous challenge. It was a new phase of persecution. And there was a big danger that the nation would become demoralized and kind of just give up, become resigned to their fate. But Miriam, she is a pillar of faith and hope. And this wonderful, wonderful child who grew up to be the most wonderful woman, she would be the remedy sent by Hashem to strengthen the people. Miriam. Miriam, despite the fact that she was born into a bitter world, never became bitter, never became cynical, and never became hardened. She could feel the bitterness of the exile, and she, at the same time, yearned for it to end. When we look at those two opposites, on the one hand, totally aware, affected by, and sensitized by this bitter exile, and nevertheless, never to stop yearning for it to end. So let's look at Miriam as a child. Miriam is called Miriam HaNevi'ah, the prophetess. There were 7 women in our history who are known as a prophetess. And here's Miriam. What did she prophesy? As a child, she prophesied that her parents were going to have a child who would redeem the Jewish people from Egypt. And from that time that she had that prophecy, she never stopped yearning. She never stopped longing and waiting for her prophecy to be fulfilled. She knew it would be fulfilled. And she looked forward with great anticipation and yearning to when that would happen. Miriam was a teacher, and the people learned from her both to feel the bitter pain and to yearn for the redemption, to feel the situation they were in fully, and yet to look forward with hope to the future. And it was through this yearning that they merited the redemption and the actual fulfillment of the prophecy of Miriam. Miriam remained on track throughout her life. Miriam was a source of encouragement. We can understand, we can relate that when it comes to a difficult time, we have hope that we're going to get out of it. But when the time continues, when it looks like things cannot get worse and they get worse or seem to get worse, and one can hold on to the hope, the yearning, and to do whatever one can about it to actually encourage those around us and to actually merit through holding on fast to that hope and that faith and that dream. We have lots to learn from Miriam, certainly in our times. Her name, yes, it means bitter, as she connected with the bitterness, but it also means mir, mar, raindrops, and it means yam, a sea. You can read it as a sea of raindrops, because like rain, Miriam was the source from which all blessings would flow. She was the fountain. She was the sea. She was the freshness. From the time she was young, from the time she was little, she thought with a redemptive mindset. When she was just a child, although just a child, she assisted her mother, Yocheved, who was the midwife. And Miriam was the assistant. How? We're told that she moved quickly and devotedly in serving her mother and serving Hashem. What does that mean? That means that her mother would deliver a baby, and Miriam, a little girl, would whisper calming words, first in the ears of the women in labor, helping them with a smoother delivery. And then she would coo to the crying babies to soothe those babies. From a young age, she was active, she was involved, she was caring. And the really key word here is active. Many people care, many people feel. But the question is, what do we do about those feelings? From Miriam, we learned, even if you're young, even if you're just a child, if you happen to see something, if you're in a place where something needs to be done, Hashem has empowered you to be part of helping, part of remedying that situation. That was Miriam, using her voice to soothe. And then Pharaoh called Yocheved the midwife and Miriam to the palace. And he said, I hear you're the midwives. I'm ordering you to kill every newborn baby boy. Miriam, who was but 5 years old, spoke up and said, woe is to the man when God will come and punish him. Sure. She said, Pharaoh, your deeds are worse than any that I've ever encountered. And Pharaoh was so angry. He immediately wanted to have Miriam killed, but her mother stepped up and said, don't be offended. Don't be upset with her words. She is just a child. They defied Pharaoh, the power of Egypt and the power of that time. Yocheved and Miriam taught the Jewish people to have faith in Hashem and not allow Pharaoh and his decrees to have any influence on them whatsoever. It's an incredible thing. Miriam would use her speech. She would use her voice throughout her life. She was called Pua. She's called Pura in the Torah. And the first interpretation is that, yes, she soothed, she used her voice. She revealed prophecy that Moshe would be the Redeemer. She also faced Pharaoh so brazenly. She scolded him for his decree. And we're also going to speak now about how she cried when her brother Moshe had to be put into the Nile River. We're told that, and sometimes a newborn child looked lifeless. She would revive the child. And we're going to hear how she's going to speak up to rebuke her father, who is the leader of the Jewish nation. Miriam was poor. She always spoke up. So what happened? Later, when Paro instructed the Egyptians to kill all the Jewish newborn males, the leader of the Jewish people, whose name was Amram, who was her father, decided that he should separate from his wife so they would not bear children who would be killed. He believed he had no other choice because the Torah teaches us not to rely on miracles. He was a leader of the people at that time, so all the other men followed his way. We're told that Amram was a perfectly righteous person, one of the few individuals who died without any sin. Of course, the nation would follow his example. But there was one person who confronted him. That was his little daughter, Miriam. She's 5 years old. And she says, Father, what you have done is improper. She said, your decrees are worse than Pharaoh's. He's only decreeing that the males shouldn't be born. But you've made a decree that no baby boys or girls should be born. Also, he said, because Pharaoh is wicked, maybe his decrees won't be fulfilled. But you are holy. You're a saintly man. So your decrees will certainly be fulfilled. And then she said, Father, I have seen the nevuah prophetically that you are destined to produce the one who will redeem the Jewish people. Wow. She, not her holy parents, was the one who received this prophecy. It, of course, tells us the high level of her soul and of her prophetic vision. And of course, she spoke with respect to her parents. But when she said these words, she spoke with strength and with absolute respect. And of course, her mother agreed with her. Together, they convinced Amram to change his mind. With remarkable humility, he recognized that she was right and immediately remarried Yocheved. And of course, that led to the birth of the Redeemer of Moshe. For 3 months, Yocheved was able to hide him, but then had to place him in the Nile. And it seemed that all was over, that his fate was, God forbid, to join the other baby boys who'd been cast into the Nile. So Yocheved and Amram came to her and said, "Hey, where's your prophecy? What happened to it?" Miriam was steadfast in the belief that her prophecy would come to pass. And it wasn't based on logic. Everything around them was disastrous at that time. It was based on the faith that she was acting in the service of Hashem. Why? Because it's a mitzvah to have children. And she insisted that it was proper to do so, despite the challenges that her parents were going to face. So as long as they could protect Moshe by hiding him, they would do so. But now things were out of their hands. She was certain Hashem would intervene. They would merely wait and see and witness what Hashem would do. And sure enough, Miriam went down and watched that basket. She watched it and saw the miracle unfold. They knew God would help. She was on the spot, and she even intervened when Pharaoh's daughter found the baby. And the baby was crying. Miriam stepped forward and managed to reunite the mother and the baby. Not only to reunite them, but the first 2 years of his life, with the permission of the princess, with the sanction of the royalty and the power of that time, Moshe was raised in the home of his parents and maintained that strong bond with his father, who was his teacher, and his mother, who was his inspiration. And you know, the Jews did come out of Egypt. And after the miracle of the splitting of the sea, all the Jews were led by Moshe in the most wonderful song of praises to God. He led the men, and his sister Miriam led the women. But we find that the singing of the women was uniquely joyous. They had musical instruments, and they danced, and they sang. And the question is, why did their joy surpass that of Moshe and the men? What was it about Miriam, who was able to lead the women in song, as well as dancing and as well as musical instruments? Well, the women had more sorrow over the exile. And the women were very attuned to the bitterness of the exile. And therefore, they experienced the greatest joy when it was finally over. And they were so sure that God was going to do miracles for them that they brought along musical instruments in anticipation of the songs of praise that where they were going to sing, praising God for his miracles. But then we have a story a few weeks ago in the Parsha where Miriam was struck with leprosy. And the question is, why? Well, we're told that Miriam found out from her sister-in-law Zipporah that Zipporah and Moshe, who were a couple, Zipporah and Moshe had separated. They'd stopped being intimate. And because Miriam was concerned for her dear sister-in-law Zipporah, and she deeply felt that this mitzvah of bringing children into the world was going to bring the redemption, she actually shared that matter with Aaron, with Aaron. The righteous are held to a very high standard. And what for an average person could be considered the right thing to do, her act was called a sin because she was such a spiritual giant. So the Jews are in the desert, and she finds out that Moshe is no longer married to Zipporah. And because she felt that it's a mitzvah in the Torah, she actually raised the matter with her brother Aaron. And she said, you know, we're also prophets, and God can appear to us at any time. and we did not separate from our spouses. Why then did Moshe feel he must do so? She didn't imagine, as later on Hashem himself would tell her, that Moshe's level of prophecy was different from any other prophet, and that what he had done was correct and instructed by Hashem himself. She should have gone to Moshe. She should have spoken to him privately about what she considered perhaps sinful. And she broke out with tzorat, a spiritual sickness that causes white patches on the skin, or a white patch. And it wasn't a doctor, but a Kohen who had to diagnose and quarantine the suspected mitzora. And at that time, only her brother was the officiating Kohen. Moshe wasn't a Kohen, and nobody else was a Kohen. And Aaron was disqualified from pronouncing her leprous or otherwise, or non-leprous, because he was her brother. And yet, something very special happened at that time. Miriam was accorded great honor. Hashem said, I am a Kohen. I will quarantine her, and I will release her from quarantine. So here we are, another time when Miriam was poor. She spoke up. And as mentioned, why did she speak up? She knew that the future of the Jewish people is dependent on the birth of Jewish children, and that every Jewish child born makes the nation stronger and more vibrant, and that the era of Mashiach is brought closer. What a story. What a lesson for all of us. Miriam had a very strong case. She also reasoned that if a father like Moshe and a mother like Tzipporah, whose beauty in Torah observance was unparalleled, whose physical beauty was unparalleled, Moshe, whose beauty in Torah observance was unparalleled. Wow, what a benefit, what a merit it would be for the whole Jewish people. This was that woman who had started out as a young child, assisting her mother in delivering newborns in Egypt. The one who spoke up to Pharaoh, who intervened when her own father had separated from her mother to ensure that nothing would get in the way of the birth of Jewish children. And so she now speaks up about Moshe and Tzipporah. Her motivation was pure. And to emphasize the nobility of her intentions, the Torah immediately follows up the story of her, quote, sin by talking about the great honor that the entire nation accorded her, that Hashem's presence, the Holy Ark, the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, the whole Jewish nation honored her for a full 7 days without interruption. Everyone was waiting for her to heal before moving on. Yes, they could have moved on and she could have been quarantined somewhere else. But the Torah emphasizes that although here her actions were considered improper for someone of her level, we can all learn. From her we can learn the extent to which we should be dedicated to growing Jewish families and growing the Jewish nation. And then, in this week's parsha, Miriam passes away. She passes away, and then they have no water. Because as long as she was alive, there was a rock that traveled along with the people and miraculously provided water. And when she passed away, the well dried up. And then the people began to complain. And then what happened is that the people complaining and pushing Moshe and Aaron for water led to the episode in this week's Parsha where Moshe hit the rock. They didn't realize. But they had water in the merit of Miriam, because she had stood at the water to watch over Moshe in the Nile. And because she had led the women in singing at the sea, Miriam, Yam is a sea, Mar is a raindrop. However, it was only after her passing that the people realized that the water they had had throughout their travels for almost 40 years was being given to them on a daily basis. This rock which produced water would pitch up wherever they traveled, wherever they camped. And although they were going to have water again in the merit of Moshe and Aaron, Hashem had caused that well to stop giving water, so they would realize that the water they'd had all these years were in the merit of Miriam. The Rebbe points out that from this we learn that the results of our actions are not always readily apparent. We may do good things, and nobody may know about it. We may not know the greatness that we are bringing to God's world. In Miriam's case, it wasn't until after she passed away that the people realized in whose merit they had water. And the Rebbe encourages us. He says, when we try to improve ourselves, we may not see the progress. We may not see what we've achieved. And when we reach out to others around us and we try to help them or bring them closer to Hashem, we won't always see immediate results. But we are assured that every sincere effort is rewarded and every sincere effort is going to bear fruit. It's fascinating that Torah is compared to water. What is it about water that's unique? Water flows from a high place to a low place. And so does the celestial Torah. God's teachings flow from the loftiest heavens down to where a human being can grasp it. The well of Miriam was a symbol for that. It symbolizes drawing down the ideas of Torah and actually spreading them, disseminating them to all Jews, regardless of their intellectual ability. Miriam was a teacher. Miriam, all those years, was like the teacher of all the women. She was the Rebbe. She who taught and inspired them. She's like the water. And she embodies water of Torah because she worked to bring the Torah down, not only to the women, but even to the children. She devoted herself to the young children in Egypt. She helped them in their birth, and then she helped them in raising and educating them. Miriam was a teacher. In her dedication to bringing these children into the world, she defied the brutal decree of Pharaoh, but also the rational decree of her father Amram. She had what's called Mesirat Nefesh. And with tremendous dedication, putting herself aside, she raised the children who one day, at the splitting of the sea, would be able to point and say, "This is my God." Zekeli v'amvehu. What they saw at the splitting of the sea was such open revelation, and she had primed them. She'd prepared them to be able to understand more fully what they were seeing. And when we say this, zeh, it means you point to it with your finger, that even a child could see and could understand and recognize what he was seeing. She was the one who raised the generation that would receive the Torah at Sinai. Miriam, therefore, represents the power of water, the power of Torah. Torah can also come down to the level of children, or, as the Rebbe says, people who are like children in their spiritual development, people who still need to catch up, people who have not yet studied the Torah, even as a child. So it was in her merit that the Jews had a well of water in the desert. And how did that well work? It was a rock, but it flowed to all Jews. It flowed to every tribe. Similarly, in her merit, the Torah reaches the entire people, even those who find themselves really far from the camp of the divine presence, because there were several camps, and there were those who were quite on the outside. Let's talk about water for a moment. What does water do? We're told that when the body is dehydrated, its blood retains more sodium, and that thickens the blood and makes it harder for it to circulate throughout the body. When we hydrate the body, it also helps the heart to pump blood more easily. It allows oxygen to reach our muscles. And that, of course, helps the muscles to work more efficiently. Water does not provide nutrients, sustenance, but it helps circulate the sustenance and circulate the nutrients that are found in food, the food that we eat, and takes it to the entire body. And as mentioned, it helps to thin the blood so that it improves the blood flow, the circulation to the entire body. It's a powerful teaching that everything in the physical world is a reflection. It's a manifestation of what came before it spiritually. Spiritually, we need water to ensure that the convictions of our minds and the feelings of our hearts will flow throughout the body and will impact our hands, our fingers to act in the right way, even our feet to run and do a mitzvah. Water energizes us. Torah energizes us. And what is true for the individual is true for the home. You know, every morning we say certain prayers. We say the Moda'ani, we wash our hands in a special way. We make blessings and we say the Shema Yisrael. What do we declare at least twice a day in the Shema Yisrael? It's a declaration that God is one. There is no power besides God. But we've only declared it in the morning. Who is the one that will ensure that this lofty proclamation is going to permeate the home and influence the way the children are raised and the way the home is conducted? Primarily, it's the woman of the home. The woman is the water that ensures that the sustenance, the vitality of Yiddishkeit, of Judaism, is going to inform and enlighten every aspect of the family's life. And that's why the three shepherds, Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, each one brought a different gift to the Jewish people. And it was Miriam, in whose merit the Jews had water. Why was it in her merit? Because this is primarily the feminine role, to ensure that the intellectual sustenance that we get from the heavenly manna is integrated into every facet of our lives. It's wonderful to study. It's wonderful to have this heavenly influence. But we are here in this world to make this world a home for God. And just as it is the man who builds the house and the woman who makes the home, it is the women who bring this lofty teaching all the way down into practicality. We're told that both Aaron and Moshe passed away in a painless way. Miriam did too. What does it mean to die by a divine kiss? Her soul was drawn to God in an intense yearning, as was Moshe's and Aaron's. Miriam is one of the 7 about whom it says that her body never decomposed. Even after passing, her body remains whole. And there's an amazing thing that the Zohar tells us, that on the nights of Shabbos and Yom Tov, the souls of the righteous women of the generation of the desert, and there were many, all of them, go to the soul of Miriam and study the secrets of the divine, all of them together. Is another powerful teaching. Before the Torah talks about her passing, the Torah this week begins with the laws of the Parah Aduma, the red heifer, and how it is used to purify those who come in contact with a corpse. The fact that these 2 teachings, the story of the red heifer and then the passing of Miriam, teach us that just as sacrifices provide atonement, so does the passing of the righteous atone for the people of their generation. It's an amazing thing. Miriam, her passing is mentioned, and the date of her passing. Very few dates are mentioned in the Torah. She passed away on the 10th day of Nisan. It's the same day which, many years before, the firstborns had rebelled against Pharaoh just prior to the Exodus. There had been a civil war. Many of the enemies of the Jewish people were eliminated on that day. And it's pointed out that typically, when there's a miracle, like Exodus from Egypt, like Revelation at Sinai, the story of Purim or Hanukkah, every year that miracle is commemorated on the very date that it happened. So we know, or we're taught, that on the 10th of Nisan, this big miracle happened, and the Egyptian firstborns fought Pharaoh and his army. And yet we don't commemorate that rebellion on the 10th of the month of Nisan. We just commemorate it on the Shabbos before Pesach, which is called Shabbos Hagadol, Shabbat Hagadol. Was the Shabbos before we left Egypt. Why don't we commemorate it like we do all other miracles on the date it happened? Because the 10th of Nisan is reserved as a day to commemorate the passing of Miriam. In fact, our sages instituted that when the 10th of Nisan occurs on a weekday, not on a Shabbos, one should fast. And now we come to something very, very beautiful that will help us to think about Miriam every single Shabbos. The 8th verse in Eshet Chayil speaks about Miriam. What is that verse? She girds her loins with might and strengthens her arms. Chagra be'oz mosneha v'te'ametz zroyoseha. Where did she act with might, with strength? Well, she would teach the Jewish women and instruct them in what was pure and impure. The word for might is oz. Be'oz. Chagra be'oz matneha. You can also read it as be'az, with boldness. She was bold. She stood up to her father. She stood strong in her prophecy that Moshe would redeem the Jewish people throughout the 80 years, even when it seemed that all hope was lost. She was powerful, beaming light into the darkness. Miriam's also called Azuvah. The word Azuvah, in it, you can read the words Oz-ba. There is might in her. An amazing thing. And we're told that Miriam is the mother of royalty. Miriam is the mother of the Mashiach. We see her quality of boldness and strength throughout her life, but also in the life of her husband, her children, her descendants. Who was her husband? She was married to Kalev. Remember him 2 weeks ago? Who was Kalev? He was one of the 2 spies who bravely stood up against all the other 10 and declared that Hashem would help them to enter the land and the Jews could conquer the land. Kalev. And she had a son called Hur. Who was Hur? Hur, the nephew of Moshe and Aaron. He was the one who held up one of Moshe's arms during the war with Amalek, while Aaron held up the other arm. Hur, from the word cherut, freedom. Ben Chorin. He also, when Moshe went up on the mountain for the first time, he told the people he'd be back in 40 days, and they could turn to Aaron and Hur for guidance when he was absent. When they miscalculated and when the people thought that Moshe wasn't coming back, they demanded some sort of symbol, an idol, to replace Moshe. Aaron stalled for time when he saw what the people did to Hur. Hur stood up to them, boldly stood up to stop them, and they killed him. They killed Hur. He was following in the footsteps of his mother. His mother never bowed to conventional wisdom, always remained Hur, ben Chorim, free to express the divine truth. But when Aaron saw what they had done, he knew he needed to buy time, and that's when he asked them to bring gold, and ultimately the golden calf was constructed. Might, power, boldness, that's the hallmark of leadership, of kingship. And it was she who defied a king, who merited kingship, the Davidic line. David HaMelech would come from her. Miriam's descendant, Boaz, which also has the letters of Be'oz. Boaz, the great-grandfather of King David, would come from her. And therefore, she had another name. Her name was Ephrat, which means royalty. Miriam was royal. The daughter of kings, her parents. She was the mother of royalty, and she was the matriarch of Malchut Bet David, the Davidic dynasty. So Mashiach, who comes from the house of David, is traced to Miriam. In fact, the Rebbe points out that Miriam had a great-grandson called Bezalel. He was blessed with the wisdom necessary to build the Mishkan, the sanctuary, the tabernacle. And the Medrash traces his wisdom back to Miriam, his great-grandmother. And so in the Parsha, Miriam passes away. And it's not known until after her death that the well was in her merit. Food nourishes the body. But as mentioned, the body needs water in order to absorb the nutrients in the food. Food of the soul is the Torah. And the water is the ability of Torah to influence all aspects of our personalities, to influence all types of people and every aspect of life. It was Miriam. When the Jewish people's existence was threatened in Egypt, she was the one who ensured there would be a new generation of Jews to carry on God's wisdom. She both encouraged the Jewish people to continue to have children, and then she went and saved the newborns from Pharaoh's decree on account of her efforts to make sure that the Torah would continue to flow into the next generation. The well existed in her merit. But then she passed away. In this week's parsha, she passed away. Who then provided the water? It was Moshe. Moshe had to assume her role. Powerful lesson here. It teaches us that when other Jews are in physical or spiritual danger, we must come to their aid. Even if we're not the type, even if offering this type of help is not our forte, when we help others, Hashem in turn will help us with all our own needs and to help us to succeed in doing and being successful at the job that's not really our job. We live in a generation where everyone has to actually step up. The Rebbe was very strong in saying to us, and he said it more than once, that everyone can teach. If we just know the beginning, if you know Aleph, if you heard a Torah thought, if you learned anything tonight, share it with someone. And while you're sharing it is not the end of your teaching yourself, you must be studying the next level, the bet. As long as you know something, you actually have the responsibility to pass it on. It's an amazing thing. Each one of us needs to play their part in bringing about the end of the Golus, the end of the exile. We are now perhaps in what we can say is the darkest time before dawn. We know that the dawn is coming. We're encouraged by the miracles that we see. Miriam's name inspires us. First of all, her name was Mar, bitter, the bitterness of the last years. But she was the one who turned bitterness into sweetness. She saw the danger, and she took responsibility. When Hashem shows us something, we need to do something about it. That is our obligation. Miriam is called the mother of all. Miriam, an exceptional, modest woman. Miriam, who brought sustenance to the entire congregation through her water, men and women. And the question is asked, why did the well have to dry up? Why couldn't it just continue through Moshe? And we're told because the Jewish people, unaware that she was so great, did not mourn her. She passed away, it says, and she was buried. And right away, she seemed to be forgotten. She was lost, and so it seemed. And so the well dried up to inform the people, wait a minute, you may not know about it, but this woman, it is in her merit that you have had water all of these years. We need very much in our times to bring everything that we study into practical action. Besides practical action, we need to do things with absolute passion and focus. The Rebbe speaks about action, and there's a story. There was a writer researching a book about great Jewish scholars and leaders. And during a conversation he had with the Rebbe, he mentioned an important person, an important figure. The Rebbe said he was a wonderful man, but his voice trailed off then and he didn't say more. And the writer who was researching this book to do a book about great Jewish scholars, he said, what is it? And the Rebbe said, well, if there were one critique I would offer, it would be that his writings lack tachlis, a bottom line, or a focus point of action. His followers admire him, but they're left unsure how to act upon the knowledge and the inspiration that he imparted. It's very important that there be a bottom line. Very important that all the inspiration that we draw from Miriam is plowed into practical action to be there for others, to teach, to inspire, to bring Torah as living waters into our own lives and into the lives of our family and the people that Hashem brings into our lives. It's like you can be inspiring, but so what? It's very nice if somebody's inspiring, but what does it mean to me? Like when a great speaker finishes talking, everybody applauds. But when a great leader finishes talking, the audience exclaims, let's go, let's march, let's act. Each one of us is called upon to be a leader in our generation. It's so essential. We all are blessed to be in this generation. We know this is the generation that the Rebbe called the last generation of exile and the first generation of redemption. And it's up to each one of us to know that we can make it happen a moment sooner. And we're going to end today with this story. Again, a story with the Rebbe. Again, a story of someone who approaches the Rebbe. Again, the story of a Jewish author. He came to the Rebbe and he wants to understand the essence of the Hasidic approach to Judaism. What does Hasidus bring, or what is a hallmark of a Chassid? And the Rebbe gave him a beautiful, beautiful answer. The Rebbe began by saying, let's take bread as a metaphor. Even if you have all the ingredients perfectly arranged, the dough is perfectly kneaded. Unless it is placed in a fiery oven for some time, the ingredients are just going to remain ingredients. You will not have bread. But then the Rebbe went on. He said, the same is true of prayer and the performance of mitzvahs. You can make a bracha by simply saying the words. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. You finish the bracha, you do the mitzvah. And you do it. You did the deed. And deeds, actions are the most important. But Chassidut, Chassidic teaching demands that we become an oven, a fiery space created of enthusiasm, passion, joy, boldness perhaps. And that's when mitzvahs come alive. It's not just the ingredients, but they rise and they nourish. Love of God actually becomes revealed. And we're told in Hasidic teaching in the Tanya that without love and awe of God, which are considered the wings of the mitzvah cannot take flight. More than anything in our times, we need action, and we need action with passion. May we be successful. May Hashem bless us all to do our part, and very soon to be there, to welcome the great, 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 great grandson of the prophetess Miriam, Mashiach himself. Have a good evening.